The vault door was already open. Imani Hayes stood in the corridor of the 42nd floor, her heart beat loud in her own ears, staring at the crack of light spilling through the steel frame. She had planned for every scenario. Guard rotations, camera blind spots, encrypted passcodes her contact had spent 3 weeks extracting. She had planned for everything except this. She pushed the door open anyway, because her sister had 29 days left, and fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. The room was small, cold, lined with servers on one side and a single glass desk on the other. And behind that desk, watching her with the calm patience of someone who had been expecting company, was Cha Do-won. He was younger than his photographs, darker around the eyes. He didn't reach for a phone, didn't call out. He simply looked at her the way a person looks at something they've already decided to keep and said, "How much is your sister's life worth to you?" Imani didn't run. She'd learned long ago that running only works if there's somewhere safe to go. "Enough," she said. He nodded like that was the right answer. What followed wasn't an arrest. It wasn't a negotiation in any sense she recognized. Do-won had already pulled her sister's medical file onto the desk screen before she sat down, and Imani felt something cold move through her chest because it meant he'd known. Not just tonight. He'd known before tonight. Degenerative nerve disease, he said. 30 days before the treatment window closes. The surgery costs $460,000 American. You were going to take $480 to account for complications. He paused. You did your research. So did you, Imani said. He offered her a contract. Not prison. Not exposure. A contract. She would work for him personally as a private liaison until the debt was repaid. Her sister's treatment would be funded immediately, handled through a private medical group he controlled, with the best specialist in Seoul assigned to the case by morning. And if I say no? She asked. I call the police, he said. And your sister dies waiting for a public defender to finish your paperwork. She signed. She told herself it was temporary. That was the first lie she told herself about Cha Do-won. It would not be the last. His world was nothing like the Korea she'd known during the 2 years she'd spent teaching English in Busan, saving money, taking every overtime shift the language academy offered while her sister's diagnosis quietly rewrote both their futures back home in Atlanta. Do-won's world was architecture and silence and the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Penthouse floors with no other tenants. Cars that arrive before you finish the thought of needing one. Meetings in rooms where a single sentence could move $100 million. Her job on paper was administrative. Scheduling. Correspondence. Managing his public-facing calendar. But within the first week she understood that what Do-won actually needed was someone he couldn't predict. Everyone around him performed. His executive team spoke in careful, rehearsed sentences, watching his face for signals before they finished their thoughts. His board members smiled and angled and never said a direct thing if an indirect thing would protect them better. Imani had no performance left. She was too tired for it. You skipped lunch again, he said one afternoon, not looking up from a contract spread across the conference table. I wasn't hungry. That's the 4th time this week. She looked at him. Are you monitoring what I eat? I notice things, he said. It's not personal. But it was starting to feel personal. That was the problem. She video called her sister every evening. Nadia was 23, younger by 5 years, and had their father's eyes and their mother's stubbornness and a laugh that had always made every room feel easier. Watching her in a hospital bed, slowly improving, tubes fewer each week, color coming back into her face, that was the only thing that made the rest of it bearable. He sounds intense, Nadia said one night. After Imani had described a particularly silent car ride following a shareholder meeting where Do-won had dismantled a man's entire proposal with 4 quiet sentences. He's something, Imani said. Do you trust him? Imani thought about the vault door already open. I don't know what he is yet. That changed the night she found him in the hospital. Not her sister's hospital. A different one across the city. She'd been sent to retrieve a document from his personal assistant, and the assistant's coordinates had led her, confusingly, to a private oncology wing. She found Do-won standing outside a room at the end of a corridor, his jacket folded over his arm, his face doing something she had never seen it do before. He was grieving. standing still by himself in a fluorescent hallway, grieving something quietly and with tremendous control, the way people do when they've had years of practice. He heard her steps and turned, and for 1 second before the mask returned, she saw it clearly. The exhaustion. The old wound still open underneath everything. She didn't ask. She stood beside him and said nothing, and after a long moment he said, "My mother died in a room like this one. I kept thinking if I bought the building it would feel different. Does it?" "No." They stood there in the corridor for another few minutes, not speaking. And something shifted between them that neither of them acknowledged out loud, because acknowledging it would have made it real, and real things can be taken away. She was already in trouble. She just didn't know how much yet. Don't stop here. What happened next, the scandal, the televised threat, and the secret Duwon has been carrying since before Imani was old enough to know her father's name will change everything you think this story is about. The scandal broke on a Thursday. Imani was in the middle of reviewing venue confirmations for a charity event when her phone started moving with notifications, and then it didn't stop. Someone had released photographs, 12 images time-stamped across 3 separate evenings, showing her entering Duwon's private penthouse floor. The angles were specific, deliberate. Whoever took them had known exactly where to stand. By afternoon, her name was attached to words like scheme and manipulation across every major Korean entertainment and business platform. A socialite with 2 million followers posted a thread calling her a predator who had specifically targeted a grieving, emotionally unavailable billionaire. Investors were already contacting the board, questioning Duwon's judgment. 2 international media outlets had picked up the story and added their own comfortable narratives about her. She sat at her desk and felt the particular cold of being turned into a story by people who had never been in the same room as her. Duwon's chief of staff came to her office and suggested gently that it might be better for everyone if she took a temporary leave of absence while the PR team managed the situation. She was reaching for her bag when Duwon walked past the doorway, stopped, and looked at the chief of staff with an expression that made the man immediately find somewhere else to be. "Don't move," Duwon told her. 3 hours later, he walked into a nationally televised shareholder meeting that had already been scheduled for an unrelated acquisition announcement. The cameras were live. Every major financial journalist covering Korean corporate affairs was in that room. He sat down at the head of the table, looked directly into the center camera and said, "There are people connected to companies in this room who authorized the release of private surveillance materials targeting a member of my staff. I want to be precise about what happens next. I will audit every financial relationship my company holds with every organization whose leadership participated in this. And I will use everything I find. Touch her again, and I'll burn down what you built." The room was silent in the way rooms go silent when something irreversible has just been said out loud. Imani watched it from her office, her hands completely still in her lap. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the particular fear of realizing that someone has decided you matter to them in a way that changes the rules entirely. Because Duwon hadn't done that for optics. His PR team would have advised against it strongly. He had done it because something in him had made a decision, and he wasn't the kind of man who unmade decisions once they were made. But then the investigation into the leak came back, and the results were worse than anyone expected. The photographs had come from inside his own building. Not a competitor. Not a journalist with a long lens. Someone on his own staff with access to the private security system had pulled those files and released them, which meant someone close to Duwon had specifically decided that Imani needed to disappear. Every interaction became a question after that. She started noticing the way certain people looked at her when Duwon wasn't in the room. The way conversations changed when she entered. One of his senior executives, a man named Jae-hyun who had been with the company for 11 years, was particularly careful with his words around her. Too careful. The kind of careful that comes from knowing more than you're saying. Meanwhile, Duwon was changing in ways that unnerved her more than the hostility did. He canceled a trip to Singapore to stay in Seoul during her sister's most critical treatment week. He didn't explain why. He simply rescheduled. She only found out because Nadia mentioned carefully that a man matching Duwon's description had visited the hospital to speak with her specialist, and had apparently spent 40 minutes asking detailed questions about her recovery protocol and long-term care needs. "He came to see my sister," Imani said flatly, sitting across from him at dinner that evening. I had questions about the treatment. You had questions. The specialist wasn't being thorough enough about the physical therapy component. I made some adjustments. She stared at him. You adjusted my sister's treatment plan. I improved it, he said, and reached for his water glass with the complete calm of a man who did not understand why this was complicated. Do one. She said his name without the formal address she'd been using for weeks, and something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You can't do that. She's not a company you can restructure. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. She's the only family you have left, which makes her important in a way I don't have a formal category for. She didn't know what to do with him. That was the truth she came back to over and over. Every framework she had for powerful men, for transactions masquerading as generosity, for the specific dynamic of owing someone something, none of it fit him. He didn't want performance. He didn't want gratitude. He seemed to want, in the most inconvenient possible way, to actually know her. He told her about his mother one evening. Not in pieces the way he had in the hospital corridor, but fully. How she had been the only person who had never adjusted her behavior around his family's wealth. How her death, when he was 26, had closed something in him that he'd stopped expecting to open again. How he had spent the following decade building a kind of control so total that feeling anything unexpected had become essentially impossible. Until, he said and stopped. She knew what came after the until. She just needed him not to say it yet. Because she was starting to fall too, and falling toward someone who had your contract in his desk drawer was not a safe direction to fall. She found the file by accident. It was a Thursday evening she was covering for his assistant, and she pulled the wrong folder from the shared archive. Inside was a corporate investigation file, 15 years deep, with her father's name on the third page. Marcus Hayes, Regional Operations Director. Terminated 2011. She sat with that for a long time before she kept reading. Her father hadn't been fired. He'd been removed. He had discovered evidence of a financial conspiracy inside Duan's family company. A scheme that had ultimately destroyed the elder Cha's original holdings and triggered the collapse that had killed Duan's mother through years of subsequent stress and instability. Marcus Hayes had tried to bring the evidence forward. He had died in a car accident 8 months later, on a mountain road outside Daegu, in weather that the police report noted had been clear and dry. The investigation file had Duan's personal annotations throughout. Years of them. Following the same thread her father had followed, building the same case, hunting the same people. His own relatives. His own board. And a note near the end dated 2 years ago that said, Hayes' daughter, Language Academy, Busan. Confirm whether she has the drive. The drive. Her father had given her a small external drive the last time she'd seen him, 2 weeks before he died. She'd been 16. He'd told her to keep it, that it was important that she'd understand when she was older. She had carried it through 2 apartments, 1 international move, and her sister's diagnosis without ever knowing what was on it, because it was the last thing her father had ever given her, and she couldn't make herself plug it in and potentially lose even the shape of the mystery. She understood now. Duan had let her into that vault because he'd needed her to come to him, because she had the final piece of everything he'd spent 15 years building. Their meeting wasn't chance. Their contract wasn't mercy. She confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. That was the thing she hadn't expected. He sat across from her in the quiet of his study and told her the truth without softening it, because he knew she would see through anything softer. He told her about her father, about the years of guilt that had wrapped itself around the investigation, because Marcus Hayes had died trying to do what Duan should have done himself but had been too young and too shattered to manage. He told her the contract had started as strategy and had become something else at a speed that had genuinely alarmed him. You used me, she said. Yes, he said. And then I didn't. And I don't know how to explain the distance between those two things, except to tell you that you're the first person in 15 years who has made me want to be someone worth explaining myself to. She left anyway. Not that night, but a week later, when the corporate war finally broke into the open and his board used falsified hospital records to suggest Duan had illegally funneled company funds to her sister's treatment. It wasn't true. But the story was clean and damaging, And if she stayed, the people trying to destroy him would keep using her as the instrument. She left without a note. She collected Nadia from the hospital, flew back to Atlanta, and spent 3 months being very quiet. She heard later that Do-won had dissolved half his board in the weeks that followed, exposed the conspiracy her father had died over, and handed the evidence, including the contents of her father's drive, which she had sent him before leaving, to 3 separate regulatory bodies simultaneously. The people responsible were charged. The story ran in every major financial outlet in East Asia. Marcus Hayes was named in the reporting as the original whistleblower. Her father's name meant something again. She hadn't known how much she needed that. She built the rehabilitation center in Gwangju slowly, the way she'd learned to build things, without expecting anything from the process except the work itself. It served families navigating long-term illness, providing financial guidance, care coordination, recovery support. The kind of place that would have changed everything for her family if it had existed 5 years earlier. The donations came in anonymously. She never traced them. She told herself she didn't need to know. On a Tuesday evening in November, when the rain had been falling for 2 days straight and the center was quiet and she was locking the front office, she heard a car on the gravel outside. No security. No second vehicle. One tired man in a dark coat standing in the rain holding a photograph. Nadia, bright-eyed and upright in a rehabilitation room, arm around Imani, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. He didn't apologize again. He'd said what he needed to say, and he knew her well enough by now to know she didn't need more words where the words were already finished. He said, "If I come back this time, can it be as a man you choose? Not one you owe." She looked at him standing in the rain, the most feared businessman in South Korea, looking at her like the answer was the only thing left that mattered. She stepped aside and held the door open. He came in. If this story stayed with you, you know what to do. Like, share and subscribe. New stories every week.